Thank you for inviting me today. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the support of my colleagues, Julie Riddle, Katie Buston and Danny White. We're all from the Social and Public Health Sciences Unit at the University of Glasgow. What makes a good father? In the 1980s, Michael Lamb introduced a three-part conceptualisation of fathering that's been widely used. This divided fathering into engagement, that's direct interaction with the child, for example in play or routine care, accessibility, that's the father being available when needed, and responsibility or provision of resources. And engagement in particular continues to be the focus of much research. However, our ideas about what makes a good father have shifted in recent decades, and in part this is due to a change in societal attitudes and expectations with more equal parental roles, and many fathers today expect to have an active and close emotional involvement in nurturing a child, very similar to mothers. More recent theorising emphasises the need for fathers to show positive engagement, that's warmth and responsiveness together with control, in addition to providing monitoring and indirect care. This stresses the importance of the quality of parental interactions with the child, rather than the frequency or type of activities undertaken together. Warm, sensitive interactions between parent and child are seen as key to the development of secure parent-child attachment. Put simply, being a good father may be more about quality than quantity. Secure, supportive parent-child relationships in middle childhood from 6 to 12 years are likely to provide a firm foundation for children as they grow into adolescence. So our study focuses on emotionally supportive father-child relationships using 10-year-old children's views. We first look at how supportive father-child relationships matter for other aspects of 10-year-old well-being. Here we're also interested in the question of whether fathers seem to make a particular contribution to well-being that is distinct from mothers. We then look at factors that may help or hinder the development of supportive father-child relationships. We also ask whether there are some factors that seem particularly important for the development of supportive father-child relationships, rather than parent-child relationships more generally. Our data come from the Growing Up in Scotland First Birth Cohort. Over 3,000 families were surveyed in 2014 and 15 when children were 10 years old. But for this study, we are restricted to around 2,500 couple families, as children only provided information on resident fathers. All of these families contained the child's biological mother, and most also contained the biological father, although 10% had a non-biological father figure. As part of a private, computer-assisted self-completion interview, children were asked to report on their relationship with their resident father or father figure using the People in My Life instrument, which is designed to measure secure parent-child attachment in middle childhood. Children indicated their agreement with 9 items on a 4-point scale from 1, never true, to 4, always true. The items measured trust in the father, for example, my dad cares about me, and communication, for example, I talk to my dad when I'm having a problem. And there was a similar set of items asking about the child's mother. In these next 2 slides, we show for each item the percentage of children who reported that a parent always gave them emotional support. Here we see the items concerning trust, and you can see that most children were very positive about fathers and mothers, with very little difference between parents. This slide shows the items about communication. Here, fewer children are quite as positive. There's also a bit more of a difference between fathers and mothers, with children communicating more easily with mothers. Overall, children responded in a very consistent way across the various items, so we combined them to create a measure of average supportiveness from each parent. And here we see the distribution of average father supportiveness scores. You can see it's very skewed. There's a long tail of children with low scores on the left. We applied a cut-off to separate children with a score of less than 3 from those with a score of 3 or more. And remember that a score of 1 or 2 indicates that the father never or only sometimes gave support. And we've termed this a poor relationship, as characterised by the relatively low perceived emotional support. On the right-hand side of the graph, you'll see quite a number of children awarded their fathers the maximum score of 4 on every item. And we could say that these children had an excellent relationship, and those scoring between 3 and 4 had a good relationship. And here we've used the cut-offs we talked about to give a simpler picture of the distribution of scores. Overall, we reckoned that around 84% of children had good or excellent levels of father supportiveness. Differences between boys and girls were very small. Slightly more boys perceived low levels of father supportiveness. Here, we look at how children's views of father supportiveness, whether poor, good or excellent, are associated with what parents tell us about the child's well-being. Parents reported on the child's behavioural and emotional problems using the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire, and we applied a cut-off to show whether the child had a high score corresponding to abnormal levels of these problems. Now, on the left, you can see that children reporting poor father supportiveness were about twice as likely as those with a good or excellent relationship with their dad to have a high level of difficulties. Parents were also asked whether the child's school had contacted them in the previous 2 years regarding one or more adjustment problems, such as the child's attitude towards school or their behaviour at school. And on the right, you can see that children reporting poor levels of father supportiveness were about twice as likely to have a school adjustment problem as those with a good or excellent father relationship. The child was also asked about other aspects of well-being. Children with a poor father relationship were much more likely to dislike school, get on badly with their teacher, report being picked on or bullied by their peers, and generally experience low life satisfaction. In contrast, those with an excellent father relationship were the least likely to report these negative aspects of well-being. And even after we took account of other factors, such as family circumstances, father supportiveness remained associated with these well-being outcomes. We found that for most outcomes, fathers and mothers' supportiveness appear to have independent effects on the child's well-being that were similar in magnitude and equally important for boys and girls. But just a word of caution, because all the information for this part of the analysis was gathered at the same time point, we can't be sure about cause and effect. And it is possible, for example, that children having difficulties at school were more negative about their parents rather than the other way around. And this will be something we wish to revisit with future GUS data when we can look at how father supportiveness predicts child well-being over time. Our second research topic was to explore factors helping or hindering father-child relationships. Here we focused on predictors of poor father-child relationships in order to help identify families most at risk and also ways of helping these families. Rather than focusing on characteristics of the father alone, we considered a much richer group of factors. And we used multivariable models where we could look at the independent effects of each factor, controlling for the influence of other factors. Family resources, and by this I mean economic and psychosocial factors, are likely to provide a foundation for supportive relationships. In GUS, we found that family socio-economic status did seem important. And here we see that parents with lower levels of education and families on low incomes are most likely to be those where the child has a poor relationship with their father. Now we turn to father's availability. In the GUS data set, we didn't find that fathers' work commitments seemed to prevent them from having a supportive relationship with their child. Being the main breadwinner, working long hours or non-standard hours, and the father's perceptions of their work-life balance did not seem to be that important for the quality of relationship with their child. However, we did find that two quite small groups of fathers had a somewhat higher risk for poor father-child relations. These were fathers who were self-employed or running small businesses, and fathers living in remote parts of Scotland. But we don't know the extent to which these factors perhaps relate to a less family-friendly working life, or perhaps to longer commute times. We now turn to aspects of family context that seem to affect father-child relations. We found that families who suffered more adverse events, such as deaths, illnesses, accidents and separations, were more likely to be those where children perceived low levels of father emotional support, and this was true even after controlling for family resources. Now we look at aspects of family context that could be seen as assets, important family strengths to build on, regardless of family resources and upsetting events. One is the relationship between the two parents. Greater partner supportiveness, reported by mothers and fathers when their child was 2 years old, was clearly associated with a reduced risk of a poor father-child relationship 8 years on. Family climate was also an important asset. We looked at two aspects of climate. Home organisation was the degree to which the home atmosphere was calm and organised rather than chaotic. Family ethos was the extent to which family members were generally supportive of one another rather than each doing their own thing. A calm, supportive family climate reduced the chances of a poor father-child relationship even after accounting for other factors such as family resources or adverse events. Here we look at parenting behaviours as predictors of later father-child relationship quality. Gus fathers reported on parenting behaviours when children were 2 years old, but in fact we didn't find any association between early parenting measures and father supportiveness 8 years later. However, more recent parenting behaviour did seem to count. The extent to which 8-year-old Gus children reported that parents used positive reinforcement, such as praise for a job well done, and the extent to which parents were interested in their activities did seem to matter for father-child relationships. Lastly, we look at father status, and here we see that children living with an alternative father figure were much less likely to find them supportive compared to children living with their biological father. More recent non-biological fathers who joined the household within the last 2 years appeared to be most at risk, more than established fathers from this chart, although there wasn't in fact a clear statistical difference. We didn't really have enough fathers in the data set to make a decent comparison. I'd now like to quickly summarise our main findings. So we found that father supportiveness had independent associations with many other aspects of children's well-being, extending beyond the home to the child's experiences at school and with their friends. Although, as I pointed out, there are some question marks over interpretation, our findings are consistent with the idea that father's emotional support is closely tied in with other aspects of well-being. And this supports the principle that health and welfare services should strive to engage with fathers as well as with mothers. Services need to take account of fathers' particular needs and difficulties over accessing and maintaining engagement with services. Secondly, we looked at predictors of poor father-child relationships to help identify families most at risk. Our multivariable models suggested that all the factors on this slide might be important, although we were less certain about the availability factor. We found several groups of factors affected both fathers' and mothers' supportiveness, and these were resources, adverse family events, the quality of the partner relationship, and the use of positive parenting behaviour. We also found two factors that were especially important for fathers' supportiveness but seemed less important for mothers. And these were family climate and the father's status as the biological father or an alternative father figure. And while our studies suggest that most children enjoy positive father-child relationships, it appears that some families could benefit from better access to parenting support, and these include families with low resources and families who've experienced multiple adverse events. Strengthening relationships in these families could improve children's well-being. A whole family approach may be most beneficial in order to build on family assets regardless of economic resources. These assets include supportive partner relationships and family climate, as well as use of positive parenting behaviour. Lastly, more research is badly needed for two often overlooked groups of fathers. In our study, weaker relationships with non-biological father figures suggest more research is needed to clarify their needs and how to support these men. And more gut research is also needed on non-resident fathers, and this is planned for the next sweep of data collection. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Alison. Perfect timing as well. So we've got time for two questions, probably. And I know that some of these findings you will identify with those families that you work with on a day-to-day basis, no doubt. These ones most at need. But I just wonder whether there's anything specific you want to ask. Kathy or Liz, can you get a microphone over there? Thank you. If you'd just like to say who you are and where you're from.
My name is Ian MacDonald and I work for Glasgow North. It was just a question about what you made at the start about being a good father figure as probably about the quality of the time that you have with the child as opposed to the quantity. So I'm just wondering how you define quality, how do you measure what's quality for the time, what's quantity?
We think the measure that we've used for this study, the emotional supportiveness offered by the father, is a measure of the quality of their relationship with the child.
Is there any sort of examples though that you could give in terms of what's the quality sort of support?
Well, typically in the past, there's been quite a lot of interest in how often fathers do things, how often they change the baby's nappy or sit down and play with the child. So research seems to be moving away from that and looking at the quality of the father-child relationship, the warmth and responsiveness.
Thank you.
I'm not really from I just, a lot of that makes sense, and I think it makes sense to a lot of people in the audience. Many of them make sense that are from the third sector. And I thought one of the conclusions that you pulled out that aren't many, but I think are really important is how statutory services and how health could take some of these on board. I think Gus obviously has a reputation and will be paid attention to in a different way than voluntary services say it. So it would be great if we could really push, I guess, effectively to help some of those other services and to the government hear that. So it's more of a leading question.
Hi, Marco, Edinburgh, Scotland. Thank you for showing us the refinement. It's a real so encouraging for us to find the supportiveness and the positive communications and the quality or quantity in terms of interactions and so just something that's all positive stuff for me and just a note about the imagery, particularly when we're looking at some of this data today about the imagery used. I found it significant because it was an elderly father with slightly grey hair receding here. I thought that was interesting because I think we can sometimes feed in the notion that father comes later in our journeys, and that may be true, however, young fathers as powerless as we can was, but yeah, thank you.
Was there anything about younger fathers in your research, just following up on that point?
Well, it's certainly true that the alternative father figure is often a younger guy, and the families with alternative figures tend to have both parents who are much younger. But age in itself didn't come out as that important. Yeah.
Just one question.
Thanks. I'm Brian Alison Parkes. I was interested in whether there's any similar data that could relate to mothers. So, I mean, are these same characteristics important for mothers in terms of children's development? Particularly the issue around quantity, just because someone's got to look after the children. And the quality versus quantity thing almost feels like you get a jail-free card from them. You know, we don't look after take our responsibilities anywhere near as much as women. But actually what seems to be saying is, well, it doesn't matter as long as it's long time with your child is good. And you know, there's an issue about social justice in that that's important. But I'm just wondering if there's any issues around comparing women's time with children, mother's time with children and fathers.
We don't have information on the time that that each parent spent with the child in the study. We do have similar data on the mother's emotional supportiveness, and I kind of slightly rushed through that in the presentation. It's actually very similar to the father's, and both the father and the mother, emotional supportiveness seem to be important for the child's well-being. You can't say that one is more important than the other.